Another issue that you have very frequently in knitting is where you accidentally create extra stitches. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the scenarios that you're looking out for so that you can avoid them. A very common issue when you start knitting is that you might find yourself where you have accidentally pulled your yarn over the top of the needle and you end up knitting into two parts of the first stitch. Now it's a little bit hard to fudge that it's tricky enough to make happen once you've been knitting a while, but it's very easy to make edge stitches into two stitches. So that's definitely something to look at. We looked at that earlier in the Learn to Knit video, but I wanted to talk about it here again. Another really common error is where you knit into the loop between two stitches. And that is how you create an extra stitch as well. So that's something to watch out for, is if you come to a stitch and you think, oh, have I dropped the loop? You can then count up the columns of stitches and you can see that that stitch doesn't have a column beneath it, so you wouldn't normally knit into that. Another way to tell that you've done that is also it's going to create a little unwanted hole in your knitting as well, because there aren't any stitches below it. The best way to do that, the best way to avoid that when you start knitting first is to keep a really close eye on making sure that you are knitting into stitches that are at the top of the column of another set of stitches. So making sure that you're not tempted to pick up those loops in the center. Another really common issue is when I'm purling my stitches or knitting them and I need to switch back to doing a knit stitch. It's very easy to knit over the yarn rather than bringing it back and forth. So you knit the yarn over the top of the needle and that creates a stitch as well. So again, watch for it when you're doing that, and a really good practice is to count your stitches at the end of each row so that you know that you're staying correct. You won't have to do that forever, but when you're starting out learning to knit, it is a good idea to do that. Another issue to look out for is where you accidentally split your yarn into two different stitches. And what happens here is I essentially create two stitches from the one stitch on the needle. And again, you'll see they look odd because you no longer have one column of stitches, you have two. So the thing to watch about that is that you can then either tink or frog back to those stitches and fix them. You don't have to, but I would always recommend that if you've done that and it looks wrong in the knitting, do fix it. But if not, you can ignore it to a certain degree, but you do want to kind of maybe tink back and fix that if you can. You can also rip back using the method that we showed you for drop stitches and fix those errors as well. So then you can always tink back all the way to the backs of your rows and get those fixed as well. I definitely recommend when you start out knitting to always count your stitches at the end of every row. And if they're not right, make sure you understand why they're not right, because knowing what's gone wrong and fixing it is definitely the fastest way to learn how to knit.